History Inside a Nutshell, the show where we sail into our port of call discussing maritime history. Well, it's fair to say that this video was a long time coming, and this has been requested by Jake, who is also narrating the video. Jake, thank you so much for participating once again, and I'm sorry this has taken a really long time, but hopefully we'll give this a bit of justice and make sure once and for all that these questions are gone. Let's just put it that way. So anyway, I hope you enjoyed this video that explains why it will be impossible to raise the Britannic.
Why is it impossible to raise the Britannic? Despite being overshadowed by her sister ship the Titanic, the HMHS Britannic has gained an increasing amount of attention over the years. One amount of attention she gets is when people ask questions about raising the wreck. But why is this? To answer them, we need to summarise the sinking and where she is now. In November 1916, the HMHS Britannic sank in the Aegean Sea after she struck a mine laid by German U-boat U-73. She sank in just 55 minutes, taking the lives of 30 people. In December 1975, the wreck was discovered by Jacques Cousteau. The discovery was featured in a documentary called Search for the Britannic. People have dived into the wreck since then, and lately the owner of the Britannic, Simon Mills, has been discussing plans to retrieve artefacts from the third Olympic-class liner. If Simon Mills was planning to retrieve artefacts, would it make sense to raise the Britannic herself? Unlike the Titanic, she is in shallow waters, at a depth of 390 feet or 190 meters. The Aegean Sea's temperatures is higher than the North Atlantic, and she is easily accessible to divers. In reality, this will be impossible. According to Simon, he says that, "While I will freely admit that I've always considered the possibility of raising the wreck to be amusing to a certain extent, I've always tried to take these suggestions with a proverbial pinch of salt. Mind you, I am also curious as to wonder how anyone can come to the conclusion that Britannic's hull is sound enough to be raised, based on the select few photos or excerpts from the several documentaries that have been made on the subject. With the evidence to hand, even my colleagues on the Marine Forensics panel in Washington DC would be hard put to suggest that it was possible to raise the Britannic undamaged." By this statement, Simon says because of the condition the Britannic is in and that she is lying on her side with a gash of the bow, raising the wreck is a dangerous task. It is the same case when it comes to visiting her or raising artifacts from the wreck itself. Having seen the wreck itself in 1995, before he brought the wreck from the British government, he has come to accept the restrictions and complications of raising the whole ship or collecting a piece similar to the big piece from Titanic. Simon continues, "Unlike most people who have an opinion on this subject, I do not really have the luxury of being able to talk openly about any thoughts, dreams, ambitions or desires that I may have, for fear of being misunderstood or even misquoted. However, while I still believe that it would be unwise for me to become a regular contributor to this forum or any other come to that, I see no harm in reiterating a few facts of life, which will hopefully ensure that any future discussions on the subject of raising the Britannic remain within the bounds of reality rather than fantasy. To be frank, there are a good number of factors that should be considered in more detail. It seems clear that many people out there have little to no notion of what really goes on behind the scenes. This observation is not intended as a criticism. There is no particular reason why you should, but there are certainly enough misconceptions out there that require comment, both on the legal, moral and financial sides. Let's start with the legalities. Believe it or not, even international water wrecks have owners, be it an individual, a shipping company or even the insurance company that paid out after the loss. Any artifacts from these sites may well be open to retrieval without consultation, but when those artifacts are landed in any civilized country, then they must be declared to the relevant authorities of that nation. In England, it comes under the jurisdiction of the Receiver of Wreck UK, and British law quite clearly states that any retrieved items must first be offered to the registered owner, who then has the right to determine their ultimate fate. Quite often the salvor may be allowed to keep them, but not always, and in the past appropriate museums have been known to benefit from any subsequent division of the spoils. I am reasonably confident that there is also a similar law in the United States, although I'm not sure which government department would be responsible. In territorial waters, the matter can even be more complicated, and even my own wishes as the humble owner do not give me the right to arbitrarily start retrieving any artifacts without first consulting with the Greek Department of Marine Antiquities, who monitor any such activities in their province very closely. More to the point, anyone who even tries it could not only end up with an extremely large fine, but in more extreme cases, even a prison sentence of up to 15 years. There are also the moral considerations, and the British Protection of Military Remains Act 1986 should be enough to indicate that sites considered to be a war grave are still of considerable sensitive to certain organisations. Inevitably, however, we come to the financial aspects, because no matter how technically possible any attempt to raise a Britannic may or may not be, any such venture could only succeed if the figures add up. The simple truth, however, is that they don't. The staggering cost of undertaking such a huge salvage operation alone must render it problematic, and this is before taking into account the staggering conservation expenses for preserving the entire wreck intact. Before anyone suggests that we should raise a few artefacts and sell them off to cover the cost, you should be aware that such practices are generally frowned upon in archaeological circles, which prefer to see the required funding put in place before any such activities are commenced. This ensures that any such projects do not collapse before completion, which could result in retrieved objects being lost due to lack of funding to conserve them or scattered in collections around the world. I actually shudder to think how much the final bill to salvage the Britannic intact would come to, but I do know that it's certainly a great deal more than the value of what's actually down there. Hopefully from this reasonably concise summary alone you will understand exactly why Britannic will very likely remain where she is. The hull itself can never be raised intact, although the possibility of raising a number of selected items for public display could just happen one day, if the circumstances are right. Nevertheless, it could only be after extensive consultation with a number of official organisations and after a great many safeguards have been put in place. For those out there who cannot accept this, then I can only offer my commiserations, but by hopefully pointing out the various options that now exist in these more enlightened times, it may confirm that there really is far more to marine conservation than simply yanking a few bits and pieces off the seabed and sticking them in a museum. It's an important point, and I am pleased to say that an increasing number of people out there are beginning to get the message. What more can you say about that? Despite the hopes and dreams of possibly raising the Britannic, she will never see the surface again, and while nature under the water is claiming her back, the Britannic will never be forgotten, especially for those who have seen her in the flesh.
If you enjoyed this episode, please like and subscribe for future videos. Until next time, this has been History Inside a Nutshell, departing from the docks. Thank you so much for all of your support and enjoy the rest of your voyage.